Greetings once again, my brothers and sisters of the faith. Faith and culture is what we discuss on this platform. Every Saturday, we are here to bring you the best of our podcast, looking at our country, looking at Liberia. And today's topic is about Liberian society and the influence of the church. And if you're just joining us, we'd like to say welcome to our podcast, Gracious Soul Podcast. We all know Liberia is a praying nation, and you can hear faith in our songs, see it in our slogans, and feel it in a way people speak about God in everyday life. But here's a question we rarely ask ourselves out very loud. Has the church been shaping the nation, or has the nation been shaping the church? I mean, that is a poignant question that we will be discussing here today, because I have here with me our special guest, and he is that's a Reverend, okay, Reverend Cephas Davis, and he's going to bring in a bold and hopeful conversation about Liberia's moral compass, the credibility of Christian leadership, and what it really means for the church to be salt and light beyond the Sunday morning services. Now, so if you care about Liberia's future, stay with us and we will be right back. Please share, comment on this podcast, anything that comes to mind that relates to what we are talking about here. Please be our guest today, and we will be right back. Don't go away. Welcome once again to Gracious Hope Podcast. I'm your host, Pastor Alexander L. Red. Now, this is a place, or this platform is a place where faith meets real life, where scripture meets society, and where we tell the truth with love so that healing can begin and hope can rise in our nation. If you are listening for the first time, thank you for joining us. If you are part of the Gracious Hope family, welcome back. Please share this episode with a friend, especially someone who loves Liberia and wants to see her strength in character, leadership, and purpose. And so I am so delighted here to start right now with our special guest to talk about our nation. A nation we all know can build roads, but if that nation conscience is broken, the road still leads to trouble. A nation can hold elections, but if truth is cheap and integrity is for sale, the ballot box becomes a mask. Liberia has no shortage of faith language, but the deeper question is whether we have our courage to express our courage through faith. And that is a question for every one of us. And that is why today's podcast is about the church in Liberia, whether the church community, both in Liberia and abroad, has influence. Sometimes that influence has been a bright light. Sometimes it has been a quiet compromise. Sometimes it has been a moral voice that confronted evil. Sometimes It has been silence when people needed clarity. So today is not about attacking the church, okay? And I want you all to understand that it is about calling the church back to her assignment. And that is why Jesus said, "You are all the salt of the earth." Salt preserves, salt adds flavor, salt slows corruption. But when salt loses its strength, it cannot do its job. So we are going to be talking about honestly our country, the church community, its influence respectfully, and with rising hope. So welcome once again, and without much ado, it is a pleasure now to welcome our special guest today, Reverend Cephas Davis. We would like to say welcome to the Gracious Hope Podcast, and I'm grateful that you are here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm very glad to be here. And look forward to this conversation.
And before we jump in, tell our listeners who you are, the kind of work you do, and what burden God has placed on your heart for Liberia in this particular season or the season to come.
Oh, that's a lot, I, I'm a Liberian. I grew up in Buchanan. I'm originally from Grand Bassa County, Buchanan. Yeah, I grew up, right in Buchanan there. But we live in Yekepa as well because my father worked with Lamco, and and at a very young age, I was about 22 when God called me to be a missionary. So I did that for 5 years. In Liberia then. And afterward, I moved to the US and I've been here. I'm a United Methodist minister. I'm an ordained minister in the United Methodist Church. Currently, I pastor in the Iowa Annual Conference in Iowa, in the Midwest. Besides being a preacher, I met with a lot of diversity, public administration, public service scholar as well. Graduate law school. So I'm kind of okay with dispute resolution, how to settle dispute. Yeah. So, I'm just an ordinary guy. I don't like to talk too much about myself. But one of the best things I do, I love to travel the world. That's one of the things I do. Yeah. Which have, educated me a lot. Yeah.
Well, that's good. Thank you.
That's about me. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. And I want people to hear your heart, not just your opinions. And that is why this whole podcast or discussion or conversation today is going to be laid out in a framework that will benefit our church, the leaders and the members, and even those who are not believers in Christ. And I want to lay a simple scripture foundation here, Reverend Davis. In the book of Micah, Micah says, God has shown us what is good, to do justly, that means justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God. Now, that is not just personal devotion. That is personal character or public character. And that is a nation building. It is about a nation building. So, Reverend Davis, let us go deeper into the first question here regarding our faith. And our faith is expressed everywhere in our country, Liberia, whether in pain, but through our war, yes, we express our faith, and we firmly believe in our Lord that He is leading our country and His people. But you see now, Liberia is deeply shaped by social faith and also its language, faith language. Yet, we struggle with corruption, injustice, and distrust. In your view, what explains that tension? And how can a nation be so religious or practice religious activity and still be wounded?
Yeah, I think it's kind of deeper than why we kind of look at it when we talk about faith language. Because even we go back to the history of Liberia, we look at our founding fathers; they were people of faith. Our founding fathers were people of faith. You talk about Lakere and all these guys, that came to form Liberia. But then, if you go back, if you look at some of the things our founding father were engaged in, it was injustice. There are so many different things that happen. But I think the whole concept, when we look at, this whole religious language, that's why in recent time I've asked my congregation to follow Jesus in the gospel. I think we're being more into religion, instead of following Jesus. Because if we try to follow Jesus in the gospel, we realize that this call that we are called to is not just about this piety, heaven waits for you, you go to heaven, but it's about God's kingdom coming here on earth. So I think if the church in Liberia will realize that the calling is not just about this beautiful street food of gold where people will walk, and then everything people just depends to be this pious person, to be in the presence of God. If the church in Liberia starts to look at the mission of the church in a different way, not just in a different way, but from a very, very biblical perspective, because if God is calling us to go to all nations, God is calling us to diversity, God is calling us into love, loving our enemies, loving our neighbors. When the church starts to look that way, the message of Jesus, then we'll be on the path, because number one, if I love my neighbor, I will not hurt my neighbor. If I love my neighbor, even in government, I will provide the better healthcare I have. If I understand Jesus' words, do unto others as he wants them to do unto you, I will start to do those things that I do not want other people to do to me. So if the church tries to be more practical, in a sense, then I think we'll be driving towards our stand in Liberia, instead of the whole piety, it's just about, I want to go to heaven, that concept of Christianity. I think the entire church, rethink what Christianity is and why it is to follow Jesus.
Okay. Your network is kind of drifting off a little bit.
Yeah,
are you there?
Is it my network?
Yeah, but anyway, I didn't hear the last part, but I know you're talking about if the church pretty much understand the reason for following Jesus Christ and understand what Christ taught about loving God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, and your strength, and loving your neighbor, we will not be as a country where we are now, where our culture and our social behavior shifting from that of Christ wants us to be. I think that's what you're getting at, correct?
Yeah. That's what I'm getting at. I'm asking, that when the church, I'm trying to say we have to follow Christ in the gospel, because when we do follow Christ in the gospel, it becomes a whole different ball game the way we look at faith. Instead of looking at faith at this whole piety about going to this beautiful place called heaven.
Okay, so it's just a matter of focusing on what is practical to do right now for people to experience who you are as a believer. So then if you look at our country today, how it is, and look at the health of the church and the society, where did we start drifting from the true reality of what Christ taught us to treat other people like ourselves, in your opinion?
Oh, that's, if, at the time I've not done deeper research on Liberia history and Liberia funding, then I will be able to give you like this whole different answer when we started drifting, But if you go back to our history, there are things that we're doing, that, we're doing things that does not resemble Christ, that brought about injustice. But I think the main time Liberia starts to drift, we can go anywhere, I think the main reason Liberia started drifting when the church started to be quiet. That's one of the main reasons. Let's go back to the 80s. You look at Michael Francis, you look at Bishop Kula, Bishop Davis. These guys were prophetic preachers. These guys were speaking ills in the society. These guys were not willing to be compromised for the gospel of Christ. But as the prophetic voice starts to become silenced, as we drove through the Civil War and after the Civil War, where the prophetic voice became mute, I think that's when the church start, the people start driving away from that, and not just that. I'm sorry to say this, but this whole new movement, this whole new charismatic movement, that is just all about, you give and God will bless you. You sow seeds, you fast and pray, and God will open windows in heaven for you. And I think that kind of message starts to drive across Liberia, not just Liberia, but across the continent of Africa. Mm-hmm. And in my own opinion, I think it's one of the most dangerous movements now today, because now people have forgot the practical part about God calling us into faith. Instead of now they just think that we can fast and pray and God do this miracle and things just happen. So at the end of the day, we're no longer looking at, the issues of justice, the issue of righteousness from a just perspective, and we just focus on this whole, prosperity stuff. I think that's when the church starts. Went awful
to drift. Yeah. But what have we normalized that should have been confronted right away as a church community?
Okay. The question, you said, what have the church?
I said, what have we as a people, as Liberians, and the church and everyone else, what have we normalized that should have been confronted right away? I think us today. Yes. What we should have confronted right away, but in turn we normalize, say, oh yeah, it is normal, and then let it drift all the way until now, and we should have, confronted a long time ago. What are some of those things?
I would point everything to, this whole issue of love. Liberians we have stopped loving our country. We start loving each other. And the reality is, when you start loving one another, you start loving what is dear to you. You don't care. We have stopped loving our country. That's just a reality. Liberians now no longer love Liberia. They love individual. So the greater good of the country is no longer a priority. The greater good of the country is no longer a priority to Liberians, and I think that's why I've read it happen. But until we can go back to that place, let's go back to history again. As someone who loves history. Liberia was sued at the League of Nations for practicing some slave way back then in the 30s. And William V. Stockman, he decided to resign from the Senate. And he said, I'll go and represent my country and plead our case. And Liberia won the case. That's patriotism. Because number one, if you start loving one another, then you no longer love the full picture again. You no longer love the full picture of the place called Liberia, the place we call home, the place we can identify with. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's when it really started happening. The prophets are now talking about this great mission, that center of God's mission, center of the church, the core of the church is love.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So then the question is, who is shaping whom? I mean, let's face the honest question. Yeah. Has the church been shaping Liberia, or has Liberia been shaping the church? Where do we see evidence of spiritual leadership, and where do we see evidence of cultural pressure?
Okay, we're talking about the shaping of Liberia. The church has played a major role in the life of Liberia. You look at our first president, Joseph J. Rabbi. He was a Christian. He came from the church. I came from the United Methodist Church. Then if you come to the modern Liberia, the beginning of the modern Liberia, most scholars will tell you that the beginning of modern Liberia was William V. Stockman. That was the beginning of modern Liberia, and he was a lay minister. The church had influence. You have people of faith that were part of government. You have people of faith that was willing to go and be part of government to bring about transformation and speak against injustice in government. So you have people of faith that was designed to say, oh, we will enter government, for the right things to happen. Then you come to Torba. He came from the Baptist church. He was a minister. So you find, and here's the thing, because if the church want to shape Liberia, one of the things you got to understand, I usually tell people, when you come to church on Sunday morning, you are congregants. When you go outside, you are a citizen. So whatsoever affects the citizen affects the congregation.
Yes.
So,
but if you go ahead.
No.
Okay. So, but looking at those leaders under that leadership, if Tubman was a Christian, Torba was a Christian, but we saw the kind of policies, we saw the kind of a way that it ran or governed, which brought chaos in a sense where there were protests, there were few that were in better position, wealth, when it comes to wealth, and the society felt at the time there was injustice, there was inequity, going on. So then could we seek, or could we safely say that there was a contradiction between the professed faith that they show the Liberian people or told the Liberian people of where they stand when it comes to that faith, and actually what it did? Because we experienced revolution through the rule or governance of the country, and so how do we see that spiritual leadership leading the country until the revolution came? Do we say, well, they were contradicting themselves? Did they not show the spiritual leadership that they profess? And did they not show the popular leadership that should be manifested through their true faith? How will you tell those people who are skeptical of that?
And people be skeptical, and then we come back to, this whole thing that, even as leaders and as ministers of the gospel, we are not this perfect righteous being or, without blame. Scripture says, your righteousness like a filthy rag before God. So when it comes to that spiritual leadership, indeed there were things that happened that wasn't right. But if you come to the spiritual leadership, on the concept of spiritual leadership, you talked about empowering more people in the country. You talk about the increase of better education, and the reality, the best of Liberian education was, from the 50s, to the 70s. That's when Liberia had the best educational system. Though I was little at the time, but they had a thing called Liberia Pay After. That Tubman introduced the open door policy. I believe those were policies that were influenced by his faith. And you look at Torba, from mattresses, moving into industrialization and creating jobs for people. And the reality is from from 56, because that's when modern Liberia started from 56 to 80. If you do a data analysis on that point, you realize that that's when we had our best schools, our best education. We had almost all the best things, So we are not saying these people did not have faults and failures. They have faults and failures. These people have faults and failures. And at the same time, you had the church engage, not just the presidency. You have people who were faithful Christians or representatives. You have people who were faithful Christians who were senators and representatives. So that's all helped to shape Liberia, because you can't divert the citizen from the church. As I said, they come to church, they're congregants, they go out, they are citizens, and all our, we had the prophetic voice. We have voice of Michael Francis that was calling, on the people, to these things that wasn't right.
And so, but again, what does it look like when a church becomes too eager for acceptance? by the society or by the culture. Yes.
Yeah, I think it kind of destroyed the purpose of the church. I did a research on the mission of the church, and most people think the mission of the church is to prepare people to go to heaven. No, that's not the mission of the church. He said, "Go into all the world and preach the good news, baptizing in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit." You know, it's a call for diversity. It's a call of reaching people that do not even look like that don't behave like yeah, the, you bring these people that that don't behave like open, be able to open yourself to other people, But now we look at the church now, besides the prophetic voice, the church embrace the dark side that comes from the government in Liberia. This man, he works in the government, he makes little money, but he comes and makes a big donation. The church accept it. So for the church, it's no longer the mission of Christ. It's no longer about the mission of Christ. They are forgetting why they were called, to be the light in the darkness. They are forgotten it. Because if you have forgotten it, maybe you embrace everything that comes your way. You no longer look to see, what is the right thing. You just embrace everything that comes your way. And then you stop being the church.
And what does it cost when a pulpit becomes afraid to speak out?
Oh, that's a good one. If in the local church, if there is no integrity in the local church, if the local church is not looking up to Christ, who calls them, the local church stop believing the words of Christ, I will be with you to the end of the age, and the local church stop teaching. That's one of the major things. The local church stop teaching.
Okay.
How many churches, are teaching?
And to all our listeners, this is the Gracious Hope Podcast here, and we are here every Saturday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, and we are talking about the Liberian society and the influence of the church with special guest Reverend Cephas Davis. And we'll come back. We'll take a short break. When we'll come back, we'll talk about the church and popular life and more. So share our link with your friends, your group, or community groups, and so they can be a part of this podcast today. And hey, comment. Okay, if you have any comments, you can share that. And also follow us on our YouTube channel and also our Facebook pages. Okay, we'll be right back. Don't go away. We'll be right back. All right, we are back here again. Welcome again. This is the second or last segment of the podcast for today. I'm your host, Alexander. So let us talk about the church and public life. Talk to me, Reverend Davis, about the church's role in public life. Now, the question is, should pastors speak about justice, governance, and national ethics? And if the answer is yes, what should that sound like so it stays biblical and not political issue or political partisan?
Um, that's a unique question, and it's a in another sense a complicated question. The reason I'm saying it's a complicated question because when the church starts to be prophetic, and the reason people start saying the church, the pastor is political, not just in Liberia, even here in the US, with our
So,
current
so before
situation.
you go ahead, so your answer to yes, should pastors speak about governance, justice, and national ethics?
Yes,
Okay,
as a pastor, you have been called as a prophet. I'm
okay.
not
And
talking
then
about the
how should they
prophet.
say that to stay in the biblical framework and not sound like a partisan in the pulpit to people?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying because
Uh-huh.
the whole concept from the root, you have to go back to the root. The concept, the concept of Christianity in Liberia. I hope one day we'll come back. You're coming back to talk about Christianity and Christendom
Mm-hmm.
because I think what came to Liberia was Christendom. It wasn't biblical
Yeah,
Christianity.
we'll find time for that.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
let
we'll
us
find
move
time for
forward.
that. So,
Because
so,
right
so
now,
the
some
concept,
people, a lot of people find issue or problem with the pastoral role in speaking the truth about things that the populace experience, like justice, governance, and
yeah,
ethics, and all of that. And
yeah,
if the pastor's role is to speak against those things or speak on behalf of the people about those things, so we can have a fair society where the distribution of resources and wealth can be equal. Then, if the answer to yes, how should pastors walk the fine line in presenting it to the nation through the pulpit?
yeah. Like what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
I want to try to
Mm-hmm.
do the clarity why
Yeah.
people always say it's politics because the concept of Christianity that have been taught, the concept of Christianity we have been practicing, the concept that Christianity is about going to this beautiful place called heaven. Yeah, so I don't want to erase. I don't want to,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
area.
Yes.
So indeed, you have to be a prophetic. You have to be prophetic, and being prophetic is what's it? John Wesley, one of these famous theologians say a good preacher will have the Bible in the right hand and the current event in the left hand. You know, and the Bible, it's a book of library. There is nothing in society that have happened in history that there is not a biblical text to speak to that issue. There is nothing. There's nothing under the sun that scripture will not be able to attack. Because here is it. Because being prophetic is not like, okay, I'm a member of CDC, I'm a pastor, I'm only prophetic when there is unity party president. I speak the ills that is happening in the unity party government, but I refuse to speak the ills that is happening in the CDC government. Then you're trying to be political. But speaking the prophetic, preaching the prophetic is preaching to the human conditions. It's preaching to the human condition. The human condition of poor health care, you can speak against it and call on the government for a better healthcare system. The human condition of education, post-school system. The church can use the pulpit, the pastor can preach that God's children deserve better, that we are all God's children. So if we are all God's children, we must treat one another in a better way. Even this Sunday I'm talking about, the famous golden rule, do unto others as you want to do unto you. So if you're preaching in short, if you're preaching the justice, as the prophet, you have to preach to the human condition. You have to preach to the situation, the suffering of the people as now, And then what do? You got to call on the government if they are doing things that are not right. The representatives.
So then how do we speak truth without becoming a political tool?
I know. I don't think you'll be a political tool if you're calling on the government. If you're calling on the government to say, instead of spending $4.3 million every 3 years to buy cars for representative and tell the government, God taught us to love our neighbors. That $4.3 million can build a housing for people that struggle with rents in Liberia.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of putting it on card, it's not being political. For me, I think it's been prophetic. Let's go back to Isaiah. These guys went to kings and queens, said this is what God is saying. They spoke directly to them. But because of our concept of Christianity, we think it's political. I think if the church in Liberia has been political, it's not speaking to every human condition. If you're speaking to only the human condition that is in your opposite party camp, then you are being political. If you belong to the CDC and you claim on the pulpit, when CDC was in power, you refuse to speak to the human condition. But now Joseph Nyamoboga is in power, then you want to speak to the human condition. Then you being political. You are not being a prophet.
And the thing here is that many leaders, especially church leaders, want influence, but few want the cost that comes with integrity. Now, the question is, what does moral courage look like for church leaders in Liberia today? And what does it cost to live that kind of a life as a church leader in our country?
I think it's to be true to the gospel of Christ and believing that Christ said he would be with you to the end of the age. Michael Francis, he was true to the gospel of Christ. He was true to about love, humility, mercy. He was true to it. Ataful Makula, these guys were true to the gospel of Christ. They were the prophetic voice because they depend on Christ. And because they depend on Christ, they always had the higher seat. In government, they always had the influence. You see, today's preachers and bishops across Liberia, they think they are looking at influence as, you do not speak truth to power. You embrace everything that harm God's children, and then you're in good rapport with the president. That's not influence. Because if you start to speak the ills in the society, mainly the human condition, and calling the government to do better, that's when you get a higher seat. That's when you get the highest influence. Just take it another way. This guy, when he was in government yet, Darius Dillon, he spoke truth, and what? People follow him and make him senator today. That's when he had more influence. But now he starts, when you start to say no to the truth, you think it's influence, not influence.
So then the question now becomes, what temptations have weakened the voice of the church?
The church is not relying on Christ. That's the only thing I can say. That's the only thing I can say. You're not relying on Christ, the Christ who calls you, the Christ who say, I will be with you to the end of the age. I've come to understand Jesus in a different, unique way. Some people ask me, whether I'm conservative, I'm liberal, I'm progressive, and I usually tell them I'm the Jesus guy. I'm the guy, when it's time to flip the table, I will flip the table in the temples.
Mm-hmm.
Because I believe and trust in this God who has called me, even in the midst of my, my sinfulness, in the midst of my faults and failures. This God has never leave me nor forsake me. So then, why should I compromise? Why should I compromise the good news for things that are seasonal?
Yeah. So then, what fears keep leaders quiet, especially Christian leaders or other leaders? What are some of the fears you think that always keep them quiet, and they don't want to speak to the truth? They don't want to speak to factors or things that will bring about healing, bring about prosperity in our country for every citizen.
Should I say, they are afraid? Because say when you stop depending on Christ, let me give the story about Jesus and Peter. Jesus walking in the water. He said, "Master, if it's you, let me come." And Jesus said, "Keep your eyes on me." But when he got the eyes of Jesus, he started to sink.
Mm-hmm.
He started to sing. He started to sing. Those preachers, they're not afraid. They stop looking up to Jesus. So when you stop looking up to Jesus, then you stop being a prophetic voice. So not to say you're afraid, but you stop looking up to Jesus. You stop looking up to the man who called you to preach the good news. He said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, anointed me, good news to the poor, relief to the captive." Those are practical things. So if release will come to the captive, if release will come to the poor, then if the society is making God's children poor, it's the duty of the prophet to speak against that and say, create better life for God's children. That's good news to the poor.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about credibility. When a church, the Liberian church, calls for national integrity, people also examine the integrity of the church as well. And in what ways must the church clean her own house so she can speak with clean hands?
The church got to hold herself accountable. God's call also accountability. Mm-hmm. The church got to hold herself to accountability. And accountability is just being responsible and being responsible for the resources the people in your church gave you, the resources. But the reality is, I pastored briefly in Liberia before moving to the US. You find ministers, you find some churches and the pastor is the pastor, he's the pastor, his wife is a treasurer, So then what morality will you be preaching? If you the pastor, your wife is a treasurer. Even organized churches like our denomination, like mainline denomination, though will get councils and stuff. But if you start not living on your own in-house rules, if you're not obeying your own in-house rules, then how do you expect? How do you expect to be that moral voice from among your people?
So have you seen anything like in the church right now, the Liberian church community, both abroad and at home, that some things that you can, or factors you can name or talk about that really need cleaning, besides some churches, like you said, a pastor becomes a pastor and manages everything. His wife gets along, manages everything, including the money and all that. Is there anything beyond that you see going on in other churches in Liberia that shouldn't and that should be cleaned up to maintain the integrity of the church?
In maintaining the integrity of the church, so what I can say, I tell people let's go back to the beginning. Let's go back to the beginning of the New Testament church. When the New Testament church started, these guys were willing to even give their life for the gospel of Christ. These guys were willing to give their life for the gospel of Christ. Because here's the problem, Alice. Our concept of Christianity, that's the main problem.
Yeah, I know you keep reverting to that, but what I'm trying to say, what is actually going on in Liberian church that shouldn't be going on, and it is not giving credibility to the church to even speak on the things that we talk about, like justice, integrity, and all of that, to government or to the politicians. What are they doing indoor that you believe, that you see now as a reality that they should clean up? Is there anything you see? Is there anything that you know that should make the church more credible? Even though they preach the gospel, they might not preach it, succinctly, or preach it to the point where they focus on repentance, sin, and they focus on prosperity and all of that. I understand. But are there any other factors or other things you believe that the church is doing that is undermining their own credibility and puts them in a position that they cannot tell the politicians to stop engaging in corrupt acts when in fact themselves have their own dirty laundry to wash?
Yeah, the reason I keep moving back to the Council of Christianity, because the whole thing, I'm not in every local church. For me, one of the things I see as a danger to the church is this whole prosperity movement. Yeah, this for me the church got to refine her teaching. That's why I keep talking about going back to the basic. I'm not in every church. I don't know what pastors are doing. Then I'll just be giving information that is not credible.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I keep going to our Council of Christianity. Because if we get to the basic, following Jesus in the gospel, like I often call on my congregation to do, to follow Jesus in the gospel, then we'll be empowered to be this prophetic voice to the world.
Okay. And what does it mean to follow Jesus in the gospel? For who are listening, can you break it down for them?
Okay. To follow Jesus in the gospel.
Yeah. What does it mean?
Yeah. To follow Jesus in the gospel is following the teaching of Christ, following the things that Jesus taught us. Okay, I'll go one by one. Let's go back to the Good Samaritan. Everybody came and passed. Nobody showed compassion. But someone who did not resemble that person came and showed compassion to them. Then look at Zacchaeus. Jesus didn't condemn Zacchaeus. When Jesus wanted to go eat to Zacchaeus' house, the people say, "Oh, how dare he eat with sinners?" But Jesus embraced Zacchaeus. And because Jesus embraced Zacchaeus, Jesus did not condemn Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus was able to say, 1/10 of mine, everything I've robbed from people, I will give back to them. That's why in Jesus in the gospel, Jesus calls us, he said, he said, I've been told to you to love your neighbors and hate your enemies. But I say, love those who hate you. Because everything boils down to love.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you go back to Liberia, it boils down to love. We stopped loving Liberia, so we don't care. So we embrace everything that comes. Because if I love you, I won't want to throw dirty things at you. So everything boils down to love. So that's why I'm saying, loving, following Jesus in the gospel is being practical to life situation. It being caring for one another. If you go back into our the song written by our founding father, the Lone Star Forever, he said, "Deserted, no, never, uphold it forever." But how many of us have been taught? Everything comes down to teaching. When the church stopped being a teaching church, the church starts to be a place. It just started to be another institution. When the church stopped being a teaching church, and that's why it's happening.
So, what reforms would you love to see inside of the church culture? Or let me put it this way, okay? How should churches handle money? How should churches handle power? How should churches handle accountability?
Handling money in the church will have a system. The church will have a system. And the system doesn't have to the pastor doesn't have to interfere with the system. Like in my church here, I don't have nothing to do with finance, but I will get a memo every Sunday to see how much is raised. We organize system, and the money flow through the system. So at the end of the day, you don't find people. I'm not saying like people, all this pastor invest of money, those things can happen. But if we organize system, you know, and the whole other organizing system again, you go back to teaching. Because if we start teaching people, biblical principles, then the church starts to become better. If I start telling you that, Christ called you to love your enemies, it's a difficult thing to do. But that's what God called you to do. We have a responsibility that is greater than ourselves. If you start teaching that message every Sunday, in Sunday school, you start teaching about it. It spills out into the society. It brings about honesty. It brings about decency. Okay. When you start teaching about forgiveness, what it is to forgive. When you tell them every Sunday, like in the United Methodist Church, we say the Lord's Prayer, forgive us as we forgive those who sin against us. Mm-hmm. So when the church starts to teach forgiveness, then people start to live forgiving life. And when people start to live forgiving life in the congregation, those same forgiving life will spill out into the society.
Mm-hmm. So then when what Jesus said about all believers, that is the body of Christ, the church, the leaders, and everyone, should be salt and light beyond the Sunday services. Now, some people feel the church is strong in worship but weak in impacting the society or people's lives, right? What does it practically mean for the church to be salt and light beyond the Sunday services? Is someone to ask you that question? Can you give us examples that touch real life in being that light and that salt?
Yeah, I think a couple of Sundays from now, I'll be preaching a passage, the salt of the earth, and this is the way I usually display being the salt of the earth. When I'm preaching it, I would take a salt, I would take a jar of salt, I put it in a plain thing, and people sees it. Then I'll take a cup of water, and I'll pour it in it, little by little. I say when you stop being a forgiving person, you're getting diluted. When you stop loving, you're becoming diluted. When you stop being merciful to other people, you are becoming diluted. You are not becoming the salt of the earth. When you start to do things that compromise the practical teaching of Jesus Christ, then you are diluting. You are diluting that salt. And I keep pouring the water, I pour the water. Then at a certain point, you find the salt. There is no taste in it. At the end of every Sunday morning, every Sunday service, my benediction, at the end of my benediction is go into the word and be God's hands and God's feet. Do not just be the Christian in your church. Care for the weak among you, people that are not part of your church. So not only the action that we do that people sees and come to Christ, the things we do outside the walls of the church, not the things we do in the church. When Jesus said, in not saying love your enemies, at the end of the passage, Jesus said, if you love those who love you, what reward it is. So if we all belong to the church, if I love you, Christ is saying you haven't done nothing. You have to go outside that wall and love the unlovable. Mm-hmm. Let's say, for example, the people call Zoko today, they are Christ's children too. They are Christ's children too. They are God's children. These are people that the society have abandoned. So being the salt is reaching out to these people, reaching out to women in needs. Now we find so many abuse across our country, and the church have to take action to reach to these people and show that caring story of the Good Samaritan.
Mm-hmm. So what partnerships can churches build without losing their mission?
When you say partnership, in what letter are you talking about?
Could be partnership with non-church organization It could be partnership with other organizations, politics, politicians, the state. What kind of partnership can they build without losing their mission or their focus? What partnerships can they build
Uh,
for the
the, the,
common
the-
good without
yeah,
losing identity, without losing that mission? What are some of the partnerships they can form or build?
the first thing we have to recognize a sense of unity. You won't believe it. One of my friends was telling me, say in the morning they get more than 15, 20 Liberian churches. You know, in smaller companies do merger. Imagine if those churches come together as merger and focus on the sense of unity to be one and be powerful. You know, but there are so many partnerships the church can develop. You know, let's take for example, now you find the government is dealing with the substance abuse issue in Liberia, our zocos. There are so churches can come out and go to the government and say, let's get in partnership to see how best we can bring restoration. Imagine Prophet and Baptist, you imagine Prophet and Baptist pastor meeting First United Methodist Church pastor and say, look, this drug epidemic is too much, let the church council, let meet the president, that come up with solution, how the church can be involved in restoring a generation that is damaging from drug in Liberia, But here's the point. Are they willing to go outside the world? Are they willing to even establish partnership? And that's the problem in Liberia. You tend to every corner, everybody want to start their own church. The sense of unity is not there. So the whole idea of the partnership, because currently you find the partnership of the other churches, most of the partnership are mainland churches, they get partnership outside the country, But there are means right in Liberia that we can create partnership. We can create partnership with nonprofit organizations. We can create partnership with government. We can do that. But are we taking the action?
Well, there might be that churches taking action. Maybe we don't know, but we almost out of time here. I just need just a short answer here on this other question that I have here, so we can wrap up. Now, when it comes to youth identity and discipleship, it is something that you kind of mentioned a little bit here regarding those young people who are, suffering from substance abuse in our country, and they are watching everything that the adults are doing. Some are hungry for truth, and some are tired of hypocrisy. What kind of discipleship does this generation need right now, and what must the church stop doing if we want to win those young people to Christ?
The church has to start condemning them. That's the first thing the church need to do. The church need to stop condemning them. The church needs to start telling them they are worthless. You take drugs, you die, you go to hell. These are some of the messages you got churches across Liberia preaching. Meet the young people to where they are. Look, for example, my friend and brother, Reverend Caleb Doma. Caleb Doma have a church called Church Without War. When I was in Liberia, I visited them. He brings these young artists, he brings them together and they worship together, and he meeting them where they are. And one of the projects he's been doing was because most of the young girls, they are having babies, so he found a means to be able to save the babies from the drug addiction. Yeah. So
Go ahead.
oh, the screen went dark, so I was just wondering.
No. Go ahead.
Oh,
We are still on live.
Oh yeah, so that is what Caleb Doma is doing. He reaching out, these young people and seeing how he can bring a change in their life. But I think the first thing the church need to do, the church need to start condemning them, and that's the serious problem about the church. The church in Liberia, they often preach message of condemnation, and that's not the gospel of Christ. The gospel of Christ is not a gospel of condemnation. It's a gospel of reconciliation. It's a gospel of inviting people to the table. to meet Christ. Because Christ meet us where we are. The woman that commits adultery. What the religion say? Religion says stone her to death. How many person commits adultery? Say one person? No, two person. But religion brought a woman before Jesus. And Jesus said, those who are not sin cast the first stone. He said, neither do I condemn you, but go and sin no more. And that woman became a change in the society. The first thing the church has to do is to stop preaching message of condemnation and start preaching God's message of grace and message of mercy. Because if we preach grace and mercy, I tell people, I can't change anyone. But when I preach the gospel of grace and mercy, the power of God will change that person. The power of God. That's one thing the church needs to stop doing. Stop preaching a message of condemnation.
And stop anything else?
To close on this whole church and society, it's our prayer that the prophetic voice will rise up again in Liberia. And I hate to say this, in my own view, I think this whole charismatic movement is one of the danger now to Africa and to Liberia. You got young people just lock themselves off. They fast and pray for 21 days and believe that some miracle will happen. God called us to be his hands and feet. God called us to work. Faith is action. Faith is not. It's not about this whole piety. I'm waiting to go to heaven because you ask people why you come to church. Because they want to go to heaven. But the mission of the church is for us to join God. Since this earth became distorted from our sin from creation, is for us to join God to bring heaven here on earth until he can come and finish it up. So the mission of the church is to join God to make heaven here on earth. And making heaven on earth is being that prophetic for speaking against injustice, things that harm God's children, hunger, no health care and corruption, all those harm God's children. And it's a work of the church. And if preachers are listening, I just want to tell you, it's time to flip the tables. Flip the tables like Jesus did in the temple. Jesus flipped the tables. So there are times we have to flip the tables.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us here as our special guest. We are out of time here, and this is how we'll close this podcast for today. And we appreciate all that you share with us here today. But I know that you, even though some of you who are listening right now to this podcast, you agree that, the church loses power when it becomes a marketplace. And also silence in the face of injustice is not neutrality. We cannot preach holiness while practicing favoritism. And the praying nation still needs accountable leadership. Revival must touch ethics, not only our emotions. And these are things I believe they are powerful, they are honest, and they are needed in our church community today in relation to the society. And so as we leave here today, to all pastors and church leaders, let us look at one practical way that you can show accountability and one practical way that you can impact your community based on the message of the gospel of Christ. And for all those individuals that are listening, understand that you need the moral courage and action that will prove that your faith is real. And that's what we need in our country today. And hopefully we all can have reflection that, today we all have family, but it is not an easy thing to have these conversations about how our church community, that is us, believers, pastors and churches that focus on the gospel of Christ, to do things that will contradict what we believe and what we profess, whether in public life or in the walls of the church. Any final word, Reverend Davis, before we part ways here today?
Yeah, to my fellow Liberians, I will re-quote the words of our founding father: "The Lone Star forever, uphold Liberia forever, desert Liberia no never." And if you are Christian, as I say to my congregants every Sunday, Go and be God's hands and God's feet. God cannot come from heaven to stop corruption. God cannot come from heaven to stop hate. You are responsible to speak truth to power. You are responsible to say no to hate. You are responsible to say no to poor healthcare system. You are responsible. You are the hands and feet of God to say no to these things. And you know, and those in power, you are responsible to be God's hands to God's feet. You have to do unto others as you want them to do unto you. You don't have to fly to go to Ghana for hospital, pass resolution, and build a decent hospital for all Liberians.
Reverend Cephas Davis, thank you for your wisdom and your honesty. And please tell our listeners how you or how they can connect with your ministry or follow your work.
Oh, in Liberia, I do a young minister conference every year in my hometown of Buchanan. Uh, you know, I know I'm on Facebook as Kenkoya Davis. I'm willing to provide my expertise anyhow in any way. I can be contacted. Through my Facebook, and I just doing my best. To be God's hands and God's feet, and to be that prophet, and be in the light in the darkness. Yeah.
And to everyone listening, if this conversation spoke to you, share it with someone. Post a short takeaway, start a discussion in your church, your home, your community, and also let us rebuild what holds the nation together. Until then, we'd like to say thank you so much for joining us. God bless the glorious land of liberty, Liberia. I am Pastor Red, your host here on Gracious Hope Podcast, and we'll be back here next Saturday, the same time. Until then, we say thank you for listening, and may God bless you. I think I see some comments here. Let me read out of the screen before we go, because I think it is respectful to do that. It said most churches of our most churches of our maybe time, or most of our churches focus on making money. Maybe that's what they were trying to say. They are now using the gospel to enrich themselves. Most of our pastors have been taught by politicians. 60% of our generation pastors are not doing the real things of God. That is the opinion and expression of Henry Yango. Thank you, Henry, for saying that. He also said that the days of Bishop Francis in our country was the best time of Christianity in the history of Liberia. But nowadays we have the worst man of God emoji. All right, thank you, Henry. We'll be back here. We'll see you again next Saturday. Until then, thank you so much for joining us. And we'll see you again. And goodbye for now. And may God richly bless every one of us. And blessed weekend.